Hello and welcome to another playbook. This one is a really interesting one because it's titled How to Read More Books. Now, for those of you who have been following me on this channel, know that I talk a lot about books. I run a series called Weekend Reading, and I love reading. I read a lot of fiction and a lot of nonfiction, but today specifically I want to talk about nonfiction. So this should ideally be renamed How to Read More Nonfiction Books, because the point I want to drive is why reading more nonfiction books helps you become a better product builder. So if you're an engineer, if you're a designer, if you're a product manager, or if you want to build products and you like to build products, I think reading books is a very critical part of that, right? So there are broadly two things that I want to cover in this video. One is why should you be reading books, and two, what is my personal stack, right? What is my personal reading stack? What enables me to read more books? And I read a lot of books. So in my thinking, a bad year is a year in which I've read 30 books. Average year is a year in which I've read at least a book a week, so about 50 books a year. A good year, like the one that's going on right now and the previous year because of the pandemic, were phenomenal years because I pretty much read a book every 3-4 days. So almost 75, 80 odd books, right? And you don't necessarily need to aspire to these numbers. Even if you're reading 10, 15 books, 20 books a year, you are gaining a lot of ground on other people and building a whole bunch of insights. So let's jump into it. How to read more books. The first thing which is critical is why read nonfiction, right? Why is it critical to read nonfiction books? The first important thing is that somebody else has already done the hard work for you. So if the whole purpose is to gather insights and use books as a source of knowledge, then either you go about trying to figure these things out on your own, or you rely on somebody else, an expert who has done all the hard work and gotten all these insights together. So that's the great part about going through a book. Pretty much a lot of knowledge is condensed down into 300, 400 odd pages, right? Opens up knowledge from more specialized domains. Now, the thing is, if you work in a particular domain and you consider yourself a subject matter expert, that's great, right? And sometimes people continue reading books in their own domain. But what about other domains? I'm not a historian. I don't know too much about anthropology, right? So reading books in those domains or on human psychology essentially opens up new specialized areas for me. The problem that one has to watch out for is, remember that a book is the culmination of years and years of research on the parts of multiple people. And then a good writer brings all this research together in the form of a book. So do not use books as a way of figuring out a domain. If you really, really want to go get very deep into a new domain, a book is probably the last thing you should read. You need to speak to the experts in that domain and try and figure out what's happening on the cutting edge. And that's where perhaps blogs and articles and sort of academic sources are better. Academic papers are probably better than reading a book, because a book happens after the fact. But if this is a domain where you don't necessarily want to become an expert and you're just trying to gain some knowledge about this domain, then books are probably your best bet at learning a few things about that domain, right? The other interesting thing is that when you read nonfiction books from different domains and you get insights from these different sources, you have the ability over time to put these insights together, right? And build new insights. This connective tissue, the fact that the intersection of two things, which the expert who might have written book A and another expert who would have written book B would have never thought of that intersection. But if you continuously read, you develop this ability to actually intersect two very different domains and try and build a new insight. And even if you get one of those rare insights once in a year, it's very valuable. Insights is what this world is really running on. More importantly, as a product builder, understanding the world around you is a key part of the job description, which is why it's very critical for us to learn from different sources and learn about different things. Just reading up about technology or just reading up about the domain that we are working in is very limiting, and it won't help us become better product managers, better designers, better researchers, right? Better engineers. We need to get information from different sources to become better at our job. I think that's almost a mandate of the job, and which is why reading comes with the territory of being a product builder. So now let's jump into my reading stack, things that have helped me read more, right? So first, I take in recommendations from all sources, but I give different weightages. So there are friends whose recommendations I really care for, and I would immediately buy that book and start reading it, or immediately add it to my reading queue. But sometimes I'll come across a tweet, or I'll come across a recommendation on LinkedIn or any other place, or a friend would message me, and I'd sort of add it to a stack. I'd add it to a stack of a queue, what I call a long list queue. And we'll talk a little bit more about the long list. But the big thing is, I used to be one of those people who had never walked out of a movie hall midway through a movie. I subject myself to the pain and agony of watching a bad film also end to end. And I was very similar in my approach to books also. If I start a book, I usually try and finish the book. And in fact, I still regret sort of leaving books halfway. But one of the key things about being able to read more is that minimize this attitude. If 50 pages in or 100 pages in, you realize that this book is not for you and you're not going to gain any valuable insights from it, drop it. It's okay, right? We'll talk about how we can reduce this, right? Where you don't have to actually buy a book and then sort of go a third of your way into the book and then realize that this book is not into you. But even if that happens, even if you start reading a book and you feel like this is not really working out, give it its due, read a couple of chapters, but if it's not working out for you, drop it. There are too many books to be read, too many insights to be gleaned to fixate on one single book, right? But how do you make sure that the books that you actually start, you actually finish them, and that the books that you start are the books that you really, really should go through? Get yourself a Blinkist account. Blinkist is a tool which essentially, both in text and audio format, they take an entire nonfiction book and they condense it down to its most critical lessons, to its most critical blinks, which is what they call a blink. Now, it's totally worth it. It's the price of 5 or 6 books a year. So 1 year subscription it totally works its weight out in gold in one way. I listen to all the blinks at 2x audio. The key thing is that people usually speak slowly. I pretty much listen to all podcasts at 2x speed. I have started watching YouTube videos at 2x speeds. I'd highly recommend. I don't particularly speak slowly, but feel free to watch my videos at faster speed also. But in terms of audio, I pretty much listen to all audio at 2x speed. But to absorb more, I open up the Blinkist text and listen simultaneously at 2x audio, so I can quickly go through all the blinks. And a typical book has 7 to 10 blinks. So all the blinks take about 12 to 16 minutes. And at 2x speed, you can essentially go through a book's key lessons in about 8 minutes. At this point, it will give you enough from your long list. So suppose there are 10 books in your long list, go through all their blinks over a weekend, figure out which are the 2-3 books that you want to shortlist, right? These are the books whose insights seem to be interesting and you really want to dig deeper and read them cover to cover, right? So based on that, you have your shortlist, buy those books. Usually a good podcast with the author of the book, a nice, deep, intense conversation with the author of a book, which sort of goes out for about 2 hours, pretty much has all the key lessons from the book. So the other way, if you don't want a Blinkist subscription, listen, you've heard good things about a book, try and find a good podcast with the author, and you'd probably get about a third of the lessons in the book from the podcast, and it'll help you make up your mind as to whether you want to spend 5-6 hours reading a book, right? But still, if it's a good book, read the book. Don't just rely on the podcast. I use a Kindle Paperwhite, helps to take notes also. I look through notes quite often, both on my laptop and on my phone. But for reading, I use a Kindle Paperwhite because it's just very easy to carry it around. I gave up on physical books a while back because, well, I literally ran out of space, but gave up a couple of thousand books to bookshops. The back of my car still has 5 boxes which need to be given up, and I haven't been able to do that because of the pandemic. But yeah, I'm moving away from physical books in a big way and moving to Kindle. I am not that big on audiobooks yet, mostly because I've been sitting at home, so not traveling. So when I was traveling, I used to listen to a lot more podcasts and audiobooks. I still prefer physically sort of reading books. And to the previous point, invest in speed reading. I read pretty fast, but if you're a slow reader, take a few lessons on speed reading and increase your speed of reading. Your recall doesn't really suffer that much, and your comprehension doesn't suffer that much up to a particular speed. Audible works really, really well for some people, especially if you're traveling a lot, or if if your recall and comprehension from audio is really good. Get yourself an Audible subscription, buy books on Audible. Again, listen at 1.5 to 2x speed, and you'll be able to get through a lot of books really, really fast. The most important thing, have a dedicated reading time every single day. I don't go to sleep without reading. So I ensure that my 45 minutes of reading happen. 45 minutes on a bad day, usually longer if it is possible. There are rough days where I'm not able to read, but throughout the day, but I don't go to sleep without reading. It also helps get your mind off all the things that your mind is occupied with during the day. So definitely read before going to bed. It leads to good sleep. I love reading fiction, and I know we have been focusing on nonfiction, but the way I sort of mix and match is that I do a month of fiction and a month of nonfiction, and this sort of mostly because the kind of fiction books that I read, science fiction, fantasy, are really, really big. That typically the size of 3x or 4x the size of a typical nonfiction book. So I give myself a month of fiction just to be able to get through a few books. And why are we doing all of this, right? I think set yourself a target, right? Don't be bogged down by people like me. People like me have taken many, many years to develop a good reading habit and are able to read fast. But when you start off, set yourself a simple benchmark. Set yourself a goal of a book a month. So every year you should read 10 good books. But again, if you're only reading a book a month, make sure that your shortlisting criteria is really, really strong. You pick one good book, even if it takes the entire month, go through it. But over time, I would highly recommend that you sort of push yourself and try and get to a book a fortnight, eventually a book a week, which will mean that you're reading about 50 odd books a year. And if you can, try and get to a book every 4 or 5 days. But you know what? All these are made up things. If you read 10 or 12 good books every year, that's great. That's more insights than what a lot of other people won't have. And if you're reading on a wide spectrum of subjects, you'll start building those connections, and it'll really start showing in your work. It will help you build better products because you'll have a better understanding of humanity and the world around you. Right. So I hope you've been enjoying these playbooks. I also run a series called Weekend Reading, where I'm recommending a bunch of my favorite nonfiction books to people, essentially suggesting that, start a new book every weekend and try and sort of finish it over the week. So do come back to the next playbooks and subscribe to the channel. Take care. Bye.